Okay, well, we have more than 100 participants this afternoon, so that's great. Okay, well, I think we should definitely start this afternoon's webinar. I'd just like to check a couple of things before we do. Well, okay, hello everybody. My name is Jemina Napier. I'm really excited to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, which focuses on Justisigns 2, which is a project. That's how we sign it. That's the name in sign language. So I'll give you a little bit of background and introduction to the project, and then I'll introduce some of the key stakeholders, and they're represented on the panel today, and they'll give a series of presentations. The first thing to let everybody know is that if you're a participant, you automatically have your cameras turned off. That's the settings we've selected. You can see that at the bottom there's a chat function. So if you want to make any commentary, say hello to anybody, and those kind of comments can go there. If, however, you have a specific question for one of the panel members at the end, you'll see that there's a separate Q&A button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can type any specific questions you have for the panel or a panel member there, and I will curate that Q&A session at the end. If people really do want to sign their question in BSL, please do let me know and I can organize for your camera to be switched on. But usually what we try to do is encourage people not to do that and to type their questions. This webinar is really an information giving session about the project. So we do not expect people to talk about their individual experiences, particularly given the sensitivity of the topic. Some information will be posted so that if any of you are watching feel concerned or affected by the discussions we're having, there are places that you can go to follow up, contacts for support. However, this is really an emphasis on what the project is going to offer, what services are available at that kind of level. We have 3 interpreters working with us this afternoon. 2 of them are Heriot Watt University interpreters. That's Andy Carmichael, whose voice you can currently hear at the moment, and Marion Fletcher. We also have Lizzie King joining us on the interpreting team. She's a regular sign health interpreter. So the interpreters, you'll see their cameras coming on and coming off depending on who is presenting and what language choices they make. I will spotlight who is presenting, plus interpreters when necessary. If you can't see what's going on, please do remember that I'll be sharing the screen so that you can see our PowerPoint slides. And in the middle of the screen, there are 2 white lines, and you can click and drag that to the left or to the right, thereby upscaling or downscaling the size of each of those images. You can also, in the top right, select either gallery view or speaker view. Gallery view gives you, make sure that you can see who's spotlighted and the presentation. So whether we have a presenter and an interpreter or not. But look, if you have any problems, please do drop something in the chat to me, Jemina Napier, directly, and I will try and help sort out what's going on. I'll be in the background dealing with the technology. So we're really aiming for this afternoon session to last for 1 hour. So without further ado, I should move on and introduce the project. I'll ask Stephanie and Vicky and Audrey to turn their cameras off now. Oh yes, what will I do? Can anybody see them? Or have you not even been seeing them up to now? You're only seeing me. Oh no, you can see all 4 of us, great. Well, I should really quickly introduce everybody. That's terrible, isn't it? Okay, well, I've already said I'm Jemina Napier. So I am the principal investigator on the project. I'm working with Dr. Audrey Cameron from the university. We've also got Stephanie Rose, as you can see, she's from Police Scotland. She's one of our panel members. And we also have Vicky, who works for Sign Health. So between us, we're going to be able to describe the project as panel members. Now you can turn your video cameras off. Thank you. Okay. So as I said earlier, this is an information session, this webinar, about the Justisigns 2 project. Once again, if you have any concerns about any of the content, please do let us know privately and we will signpost you to help and assistance. So the first thing is obviously myself giving background. It should really be the other way around. Sorry. Then I'll hand over to Stephanie Rose, who really, from Police Scotland's point of view, talk about support services that are available for women who have experienced either GBV, which is the abbreviation for gender-based violence, and again, we'll go into this a bit later, or they are experiencing domestic abuse. And Stephanie Rose will give us the police perspective. We'll then hand over to Vicky, who, as I've already said, works with Sound Health in supporting deaf women in these circumstances. And then Audrey will give more of a description about the project aims, what work we're going to be doing, what our plans are, and so on and so forth. So really, this project is in existence. In some ways, it's called the Justisigns 2 project because the first project we had ran for 2.5, 3 years and looked at how deaf people accessed police services generally. We worked with Police Scotland in collaboration with them and a number of other stakeholders and partners. And through the process of that project, we developed materials, training for interpreters and also for police services in order for them to work together better. So we provided courses, resources and materials, a toolkit, and we traveled far and wide, disseminating our research, producing leaflets, booklets. So there was a lot of information, all provided free and also on the website. So you can still go and visit the website, the Justisigns from the first project, and download any of the materials. So the project gave us pause for thought, and we realized that there was one specific area that there was a real scarcity of information and work done. As we're all very well aware, deaf women who experience violence or abuse ideally would be provided support and services directly from service providers who understood their language and their culture. This not being the case, in terms of accessing direct services, they have to access typically local services, whether they're dealing with the police or counselling services or whatever, and usually that would be through an interpreter. So we realised there was a very great need for development of understanding materials and resources in this area. We knew that there was some work done in terms of how to support deaf victims, but it's very piecemeal. So this project really wanted to focus, first of all, specifically on deaf women and specifically on gender-based violence or domestic abuse. And that was the scope and the scale of this project. And we'll talk more about that later. Before we go any further, we should really give a definition. Because this is a European project, and Audrey will explain more about that later, we had to be very clear about our definition for gender-based violence, whichever sign you want to use for that. So in terms of it, the definition comes from the United Nations, and it very clearly focuses on women. So we're looking at physical or sexual abuse, mental health abuse. So really women who have been through those negative experiences. And the organization Amnesty International, in describing domestic abuse situations, makes a link with gender-based violence. So gender-based violence can include forced marriages, female circumcision. It covers a very wide scope, whereas domestic abuse is just one form of GBV. So here in the UK, mostly we talk about domestic abuse. That's the vernacular, the term that's used more in the UK. And in Scotland, in fact, there is actually some guidance to talk about VAWG, which is violence against women and girls. That's a different acronym. So that's the frame that we use in Scotland. So we felt it was very important as a project on a European level to be very clear about our definition of gender-based violence, but also to recognize the use of the term domestic abuse and to be inclusive of those And to recognise that, of course, such abuses can occur to men too, but clearly the vast majority of situations involve women, and that's our understanding. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Stephanie Rose. I'm going to keep sharing the PowerPoint, and Stephanie will give you some of the background from Police Scotland's perspective on their services and support when it comes to domestic abuse.
So I'm just trying to find Marion. Okay, you spotlighted, Marion? Yeah. Over to you, Stephanie.
Jemima, could you go back? That's not the first slide. If you could just nip back to the start, please. That's us, thank you. Okay, thanks very much for asking me to come along and give a presentation today. I work for Police Scotland. I've been a police officer for 23 years. And I currently work as a National Equality and Diversity Officer. A lot of my work involves working with deaf communities in Scotland to look at how we improve access to services. We've been working with Heriot-Watt University and the team on this project, along with my colleagues from the Domestic Abuse Coordination Unit, which I'll talk a little bit about. So I'm going to give a little bit of background on Police Scotland's position on domestic abuse mainly, but as Jemima says, we look at gender-based violence across the board in terms of the different ways it may show itself. Next slide, please. This is the kind of only slide that's got lots of words on it. We thought it was important to start with the definition that Police Scotland and the Crown Office and Procurator's Fiscal Service work to. So we define domestic abuse as any form of physical, verbal, sexual, psychological, or financial abuse which might amount to criminal conduct and which takes place in the context of a relationship. That relationship can be between partners, so by that we mean they're married, they're cohabiting, they're in a civil partnership or a similar relationship, but also you can be ex-partners as well. And more often than not, the abuse will take place in the home. However, it can happen anywhere, including online incidents. Probably the most important thing to tell you today is that domestic abuse and tackling domestic abuse is an organisational priority for both ourselves and the Crown Office. And we've put together a joint protocol, and that effectively is available online for anybody to read, but it's about how we intend and continue to tackle domestic abuse together. Next slide, please. When we talk about domestic abuse, we thought it was important we kind of gave you a little bit of a flavour of what that means in terms of statistics. So we record 60,000 domestic abuse incidents every year in Scotland. That's only the ones that are recorded. That's not, obviously, all the incidents are taking place, because we're very aware that not all domestic abuse is reported to the police. Within that 60,000 instance, 82% of those instances, the offender, the suspect, the accused person is male. And that kind of again links to what Jemina was saying about the vast majority of instances having female victims. It doesn't mean that domestic abuse doesn't happen to men, it absolutely does. But the vast majority of our recorded instances are male perpetrators and female victims. Next slide, please. When we're looking at those statistics, that basically means that we have estimated that every 9 minutes of every day, we're responding to a call of domestic abuse, and that we've kind of looked and analysed policing, and we've realised that 20% of all operational police time is spent dealing with domestic abuse. 88% of incidents occur within the home, as we mentioned, and that's a lot of the issues with regards to domestic abuse, is that when they're behind closed doors, we don't often see or know what's happening, and it can be difficult for us to understand everything that's happened to be able to arrest offenders. On the screen, there's a kind of campaign message that our domestic abuse unit put out, and it says, "We're coming for you." That actually was kind of targeted at offenders, and that was a message to them saying, "We will come. If somebody reports something, we will come and we will get you." So that was to the suspects and the offenders. But in actual fact, the domestic abuse team are kind of keen to point out that that's also meant as a reassurance message to victims of domestic abuse as well, to say, "We are coming for you. So we're coming to give you support. We're coming to try and make you safe and help you get to a safe place." Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background about the types of officers that deal with domestic abuse incidents in Police Scotland. At the bottom of the large triangle there, you'll see Tier 1. We call it response policing. That's when you contact the police through 101, 999. They're the police officers that come running, come to you as quickly as possible. We have 13 police divisions across Scotland, and on the map there, they're represented by the red dots. So that's 13 policing divisions across Scotland. The vast majority of domestic incidents will be dealt with by our frontline response policing officers. Tier 2 are the divisional domestic abuse specialists. So within every one of those divisions, they're represented on the map by the blue circle around the red dots. So they're there to support the response police officers, help advise them, but they'll also take on some of the more complex domestic incidents, because as you can imagine, domestic abuse happens in a lot of different ways. Some are, incredibly complex, particularly historical related incidents and serious sexual related incidents. So the domestic abuse specialists are there to support us as frontline police officers, but also to take on more complex inquiries. And then Tier 3, that's the Domestic Abuse Task Force. They're the little yellow dots on the map. They're based, so there's a smaller amount of teams, but they're based across the country. And they're there to provide the kind of specialist response and a national overview of domestic abuse, trying to make sure that they deal with the worst offenders of domestic abuse. And then in the background, you'll see the red triangle, and that's the Domestic Abuse Coordination Unit. And their job is to kind of connect it all and link it all. They also kind of look to other police forces in the UK, and they look at ways in which we can improve how we respond to domestic abuse. Next slide, please. The most important thing for us is to stop domestic abuse happening in the first place. As we say, we've recorded over 60,000 domestic incidents, and we work with partners to kind of support the victims, but the best thing for us would be to stop that happening in the first place. And we kind of ask ourselves frequently, how can we help more people, and how can we prevent this happening in the first place? And one of the main things that has come into legislation in Scotland is on the next slide, please. So the disclosure scheme for Domestic Abuse Scotland, it's a bit of a mouthful, but this provides a formal process for us sharing information about people at risk of domestic abuse. Next slide, please. What that actually means is you have the right to ask. If you have concerns about a current partner or an ex-partner with regards to domestic abuse behaviour, if you're concerned about a friend, if you're concerned about a relative, then you now have the right to ask if their partner is a risk to them. It allows family, friends, yourself to submit an application to the police to ask if your partner has a history of domestic abuse behaviour. Next slide, please. You would complete an online form, or there's different ways. I'll explain how to complete the form shortly. But basically, it's all about sharing information. You submit a form, you say, I'm worried about my partner, or I'm worried about my sister's partner, or my relative or friend's partner. I have concerns about their behaviour, and I'm worried that they may be possible, that they may get kind of attack my friend, my sister, whoever, and they may be at risk of domestic abuse. So you have the right to ask. We'll do some background checks on that individual. If we think there's information that we should be sharing with you, we sit with partners and we make a joint decision about the information that we should share. And that information is shared with the partner of the person that we've checked. So for example, if I reported I was concerned about my sister, that her partner may be abusing her, I submit the form, but they wouldn't disclose that information to me. They would go straight to my sister and disclose that information to my sister. There is no obligation on that person then to do anything, as you'll see in the slide there, that says, should I stay or should I go? That is that individual's decision. All we're saying is that this partner, this person that you're seeing, has a history of domestic abuse, and we believe that you are at risk, and we're giving you that information so you can make an informed decision as to what you want to do. Next slide, please. If you want to make an application for the right to ask, then you can do that on the Police Scotland website. You can go into a police station, you can stop and ask a police officer on the street, or you can go through the 101 non-emergency service. And for people for whom British Sign Language is their first language, you can use the Contact Scotland BSL service to contact the police service centre, and they'll connect you with the right information. That's for making an application to ask about the right to ask. However, if there's a domestic incident ongoing, then it's important that you contact the police direct in the quickest and best way that you can. That may be through the emergency 999 text service, through the BT text relay service, or again through the Contact Scotland BSL service, whatever system is most appropriate for you. Next slide, please. You can also report domestic abuse through the Police Scotland website. There's a form that allows you to kind of take your time filling in the information. And again, this can be completed by you as the victim of domestic abuse, or by a neighbour, friend, family member that has concerns. They can submit that form and we'll assess it and decide on the best course of action. Next slide, please. That's very quickly a kind of background to the numbers of domestic incidents we deal with, and some of the types through the definition that we've spoken about. There's probably two main aspects for ourselves working on this project with Heriot-Watt University. One is the domestic abuse aspect. So the fact that the nature of the types of incidents means that a lot of people don't tell us what's happening, and it's important that we can't help if we don't know what's going on. It's important to know that the right to ask scheme is there. But also there's a large aspect here around accessibility of police services. So that's where my aspect of advising on this project comes in, around looking at how we can get better at making our services accessible for someone whose British Sign Language is their first language. And we have been doing some work on that, so supporting this research project goes a long way to do that. But we've also been working with British Sign Language interpreting agencies. We now go direct to BSL agencies to provide BSL interpreters, which has improved the availability of interpreters for police assignments. We've also working with Contact Scotland BSL to look at how we can promote and encourage the use of their service to ensure people can access us. And there's also work going on across the UK, looking at how we can improve emergency contact services. So at the moment that's through an SMS 999 service, but we're looking across the UK at how we can have a video service that would allow emergency contact. That's very much still ongoing, but it's important that you understand that we are trying really hard, and we do understand that there are issues there that we need to overcome to make sure our services are more accessible. And that's a quick summary of sort of the domestic abuse side and a quick chat on the accessibility side, and obviously happy to take questions at the end through Jemina. Thanks, Jemina.
Waiting for my PowerPoint. Hello, my name is Vicky, and this is my sign name. I will be talking about my service, Sign Health. I hope you can see my slides okay. So I'll be talking about Sign Health today. So Sign Health's aim is to improve deaf people's health and well-being. We have lots of different services within Sign Health. First is the psychological therapists. All our therapists can sign and use BSL or SSE or an oral method of communication. It depends on the needs of the client. We can support with counselling or CBT, which is cognitive behaviour therapy. You can refer yourself through our website, you can fill out our referral form, or you can ask your GP to make a referral. Our second service is our domestic abuse service, which I will explain more later. We also have social care services. We have care homes all over the UK, including in Leeds, Birmingham, Manchester, and London. And they support deaf people who have mental health issues or complex needs. We also have an outreach team to support deaf people in the community who the deaf people are isolated or have mental health problems, and they can support those people within the community. We also have an advocacy team. They support deaf people who have mental health issues, who aren't sure of their rights or of their treatment. Maybe they need to contact the mental health nurse or the doctor and they're not quite sure. The advocacy is deaf and they can support them on their rights and improve their awareness and knowledge. We also have Shout. Shout supports, it's a general service for people that have mental health problems. It's a helpline and it now has a text service. So if you're having suicidal thoughts or you've got depression and you need to talk to somebody urgently, now you can work with Sign Health and Shout, who partnership together, and you can have a text number for deaf people. You can text the word deaf to 85258. There's more information on our website. So if you search for Shout on Sign Health website, you'll find more information. We also have work with the Truth Project. This is for deaf people who have experienced child sexual abuse in their childhood. Maybe it happened at school or youth club or camping. And maybe they're feeling emotional and they want to share that information. It's an independent inquiry set up by the Home Office, the government. It's for hearing people, and now we're working together with Sign Health to support deaf people as well. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to focus on our Sign Health domestic abuse service. So firstly, I will be talking about IDVA. That is an abbreviation for Independent Domestic Violence Advisor. We support deaf adults, both male and female, and we support people that have experienced or are experiencing domestic abuse. We can offer advice and support to make sure the deaf people have a safety plan. At the moment, because of lockdown, we are only supporting remotely. We can support with the police, with housing, social services, with court, solicitors, immigration, with visa support. We can also signpost to counselling, for example. We also make sure our clients have knowledge of their rights. There's lots of laws involved, maybe if they're not sure. As Stephanie from the police was explaining, there's lots of laws. And also there's court orders and your housing rights. We can support with all these different issues. Now I'm going to talk about YPVA, Young Persons Violence Advisor. They can support people from 11 to 25 years old. So somebody that's in education, be it school, college or university. We can support through one-to-one for children that have experienced or witnessed abuse or have experienced the abuse themselves. The YPVA also deliver workshops in schools or colleges or youth clubs, deaf clubs, or with different deaf organisations. The workshops cover lots of different topics, for example, healthy relationships, online safety or internet safety, consent, sexting, and lots of other topics. That's to raise awareness for young deaf people. Also, we work with lots of different agencies with a multi-agency approach. So when we first meet a client, we will do a risk assessment to monitor their risk, if they're low or high risk. And if they're a high risk client, we will signpost them to what is called a MARAC. That's an abbreviation for Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference. So we will make that referral to the local council. Depends where the client lives. We'll make that referral. And then we raise a conference. It's usually every 2 weeks or every month, depending on the council. And we invite lots of different professionals, for example, housing, police, social services, drugs and alcohol support. Lots of different agencies and professionals are involved, and we have a big meeting to discuss the client, to make the best support and to signpost that client. We also work with housing, solicitors, find the right solicitor for our clients and help them report to the police. Lots of our clients aren't sure on how to report if they want to. We make sure interpreters are supplied as well. And we signpost to counselling under Sign Health or to other counselling services as well. We also provide training to other professionals. As you know, most professionals have never worked with a deaf person before. They're not sure on the best support. They don't have any deaf awareness. And so we provide training to talk about domestic abuse within the deaf community. We train them to raise awareness and to build their confidence so they can work with deaf people. Also, we provide workshops for the deaf community. So it could be to other deaf organisations. They might invite us to train their staff. We also have our own events we set up. Also, we deliver survivor workshops. This is for deaf survivors. So it's for deaf women only that have experienced domestic abuse. And it's to change and improve their life. We train them on lots of different topics, including the impact of abuse on children, and the survivor workshop is 7 weeks. And so far it's been very successful. Lots of deaf survivors feel very confident after the workshops. Next slide, please. So where are we and who do we support? We have been offering face-to-face support for deaf adults who live in London and Kent. We've been doing that for many, many years, but obviously since lockdown and the pandemic, we now only offer a remote service, which is an ongoing service. Now we support all over England, and we continue to work and support our clients remotely. But unfortunately, we don't cover Scotland, Northern Ireland or Wales at the moment, but we are really hopeful that in the future we can get funding and cover all over the UK. But if anyone here lives in Scotland or Northern Ireland, sorry, go back, or Wales, and you need support and you're a BSL user, we are happy to support through signposting to your local services. We can work with your local service to make sure that they have the accessibility and the deaf awareness to give you the appropriate support. And also we offer one-to-one support for our deaf clients and deaf young people. And deliver workshops for deaf people in London and Kent. And that's ongoing within schools, but unfortunately since schools are closed, that's online now as well. We have a children and families worker, and their role is to support deaf adults who have children. It doesn't matter if they're deaf or hearing, as they have witnessed the parents' abuse and they might feel emotional that can affect children. They support the deaf children to support the deaf adults to support the children. And they also can work with social workers to provide the right support. We know deaf parents have many bad experiences with social services, lots of boundaries and communication boundaries, and maybe the social worker doesn't have much deaf awareness. So we work with them and the social worker to raise that awareness. We have lots of BSL videos and accessibility on our website. We also have a quiz. If maybe you're unsure if you're in an abusive relationship, we have a quiz that you can do on our website. We also have lots of different topics covering on our website, which is all in BSL, including Clare's Law, refuge, different support, safety planning. We have 10 short films which highlight different videos. We were funded from the Home Office to create these films. They're all deaf actors, all in BSL with subtitles. And they cover different topics. For example, sexual abuse, stalking, FGM, forced marriage, consent, LGBTQ+, lots of different topics. So have a look at our website. It is www.signhealth.org.uk. Also, our contact details are on the screen. If you have any concerns about yourself or a family member or a friend, please do refer to us. You can do a self-referral, or the social service can refer to us, or the police. We are here to support you and to stop domestic abuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Vicky for her presentation. That was a great description about the important support services available. Thank you. Yes, if you can turn your camera off, that would be great. Thank you, Vicky, but we'll get you back for Q&A. Thank you. Andy, I'm going to assume he can see me okay. I'm seeing nobody, but I hope it's all okay. Look, thank you very much, obviously, to Stephanie from Police Scotland and Vicky from Sign Health for their description of the services that are currently available, these crucial services that we have available. I'm now going to talk about the project at Heriot-Watt University, Justisigns 2, and focus on the project itself. Now, because of all of the evidence in terms of what we're looking at in terms of data collection, supporting people, developing services. So you can see from this slide what the goals of the project are. It is funded by Erasmus+, which is a European funding scheme for development of training materials. So we secured that funding at European level to look at the barriers to accessing services for deaf people who are the victims, and need support services and face those obstacles in that. So we received the funding from the European Commission in order to produce those materials in sign languages, also materials for those people in terms of refugees, migrants to other countries, those who obviously in the UK we're going to be focusing on sign language users, but our partners in other countries will have a slightly different focus, as you'll see from the next slides, in terms of migrants, refugee and asylum seeking women and girls. So the group that Harriet Watt leads contains a number of partners across Europe, as you can see from this slide. So in Ireland, the project is led by the Inter-Resource Group. You can see their first logo at the top. They really applied for the funding and brought the research partners together in this consortium in order to improve and better services and access for, well, in terms of interpreters, victims, and the service providers. We've also got Vigo University, who are focusing on the refugees and asylum seekers, as I mentioned. Other partners, as you can see, there is Harriet Watt. And we've also got Trinity College Dublin. And we have Police Scotland, Crisis Centre. So we have a number of stakeholders and partners. And in Switzerland too, you can also see, this is the University of Applied Sciences, Special Needs and Education from Switzerland. So they're involved as well. So we have a wide diversity of stakeholders. Thank you. And I'll have the next slide, please. In terms of what we are doing here in the UK, it's not only the Harriet Watt team. We've got our project advisory group for the UK, bringing in expertise. Obviously, interpreting research is one area of expertise. I'm bringing my experience with child protection work in the deaf community. But we are certainly not expert enough in all the different areas. So we require some advice in terms of making sure that the project runs as best as possible. So that includes ASLI, the Association of Sign Language Interpreters, the British Deaf Association, deaf intermediaries. We've got who work in police services, a very important group of people to be involved in this. Police Scotland themselves, Sign Health, who we're familiar with. Edinburgh University's social policy, are linked with GBV, and they're involved too. We've also got Women's Aid and Wise Women, which is a Glaswegian project. So we're working in collaboration, and we get together every 3 months so that we can get advice and get steerage for the project itself. So we'd like to thank all of those important organizations and stakeholders for their support for the project. Next slide, please. So the research will focus on delivering resources to a number of different groups. So we have obviously the survivors and the victims of GBV. We have interpreters, police services, those who provide services to victims, the multi-agency actors, social workers, and health staff. So we will be providing training and resources to all of those stakeholder groups. Next slide, please. And when you look at the 3-year project, over the life of the project, there are a number of different goals. First of all, research to find out the landscape, what's going on in the UK and other countries in terms of service provision, what's available, what's accessible, how many services are on the ground for BSL users. We know, for example, that Sign Health is not in Scotland, Northern Ireland, or Wales. So we have to do this research first. So that we can then develop training and identify resources to fill those gaps. And at the end of the whole of the project, we will be providing, as you can see, these different outputs. So the first is a review. The second is a course, a VET course for those who are involved. We'll provide training for interpreters too, and a handbook for community interpreters in terms of help in gender-based violence situations. We'll be providing a video, which will be available on the website. So you can see there are a number of goals here for the 30 months of the project. We've already had a number of months going so far, and we've set the foundations well for the project. But these are all the deliverables and the outputs. And today is obviously a good opportunity for us to put the project on your radar, and we'll be regularly updating the community yourselves, as well as developing the training projects. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, because of COVID, many of the training sessions will have to be delivered online through Zoom and other online platforms. But in some ways, you could see this as a good thing because we're able to cover more of the UK with the training. People don't have to physically attend. So to that end, we'll be having master classes for sign language and spoken language interpreters in terms of how to work better together, because there's really not very much training for interpreters in terms of working with gender-based violence services in that area. And clearly the police lack information too. The service providers need to know how to join up their services too. So there's masterclasses for them. There are training sessions, as we've already described, for these service providers. There will be a European policy conference, which will be hosted by the European Union of the Deaf. We're not responsible for that, that's their job. We'll have training sessions with various police forces in the different countries across the whole of Europe, and the same in terms of access for deaf people, interpreters and deaf interpreters. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So just to show you what we know already from the research that is available, because there are some research studies that have identified, there isn't very much in terms of deaf-specific GBV or domestic abuse research. Most of the research and data available really includes deaf people within the larger disability group, so we have no way of disambiguating those figures. But with that in mind, there is an understanding that research shows that disabled people are definitely at higher risk of domestic abuse than non-disabled people, or GBV. And you can see from this slide that in 2015, there was a crime survey that reported that those who have a long-standing illness or disability were twice as likely to experience some form of domestic abuse. So there's a double risk. So there's clearly a need to improve access to these services for people from this group. Next slide, please. It's also been identified that disabled victims suffer more and frequent abuse over longer periods of time than non-disabled victims. So the abuse goes on for an extended period, typically up to 3 years before they'll access support, whereas those non-disabled victims will take 2 or less years. So we see an extended period, a long time waiting to seek support. And furthermore, after receiving support or seeking support, we found that disabled victims were 8% more likely to continue to experience abuse compared to non-disabled victims. Next slide, please. Now, why is this the case? Why are we looking at a group with elevated risk? Well, there may be a number of reasons. The first of those being what's called poor commissioning, i.e. funding of support services. In terms of accessing interpreters and other services. There's also a lack of awareness and understanding in the practice professions about what's needed. There's a social stereotyping that of victims of abuse. You know, deaf and disabled people are easy to abuse, but that's not necessarily the case. That's a misconception. And also, as it says here, some of the services are inaccessible. They might only, for example, offer telephone support, which excludes people that can't communicate over the phone. So if you don't know if you can't do that, how are you to ask for help? Next slide, please. Oh, right. So our methodology, and in fact, the 9 months so far, what we've been doing is conducting a literature review, seeing what's out there. We don't want to repeat what's already available. So we have been collecting a good evidence base and putting together a good literature review for the report to be able to present to the European Commission, which helps us to identify funding for improvements to services such as health services across the UK, as well as the support that's needed for Police Scotland and access to interpreters. So it's really collecting the evidence for that. So there's the survey for service providers and sign language interpreters in terms of the lack of training needs, so that we can then create the necessary materials. And that's a step that we'll be taking very soon. I think Joanna will explain that. And we've got different research partners, and we're in the process of devising those surveys so that we can better identify what is required in terms of needs. Then we will be interviewing deaf women who have experienced gender-based violence or domestic abuse, and asked them how their experiences were in terms of accessing support, what services they've received. So once again, this will feed into and inform the development of our training materials and resources. And next slide, please. Now, obviously, we're going to need help from people like yourselves in terms of getting this survey out far and wide. So we are looking to people in this audience to help us in that regard. And we also, if you have relevant experience, please do email, get in touch with the project. We'd be happy to open lines of communication so that as many of us work together to improve the situation as best we can. So this is the Twitter handle. You can follow our website in terms of updates and information. And as I said, all the way at the end of the project, we'll be producing a wealth of training materials and resources. That is, after all, our main goal. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And now we're going to move to the question and answer phase of the afternoon. So we're going to get all the panel members back, and then Jemina will be curating the Q&A.
Thank you, Audrey. Okay.
Jemina, my video's not to allow me to start if you want me to come on.
Okay, hang on a second. Sorry. I think I switched it off, that's why. It should work now. Vicky? Just hang on for one second, just hang on. You started signing, but there's nobody voicing for you. So now over to you, Vicky, on you go.
No, there's no advocacy service in Scotland, that's right. Hopefully one day there will be. Audrey has mentioned there's been lots of research happening and inquiries. So hopefully one day it'll be able to be set up.
Okay.
The other question, just need a bit of clarification. The islands in Scotland? Ah, it's for the police.
Yes, the Police Scotland query.
I think we're running out of time, so I'm not sure if we've got time for all the questions. So quickly, I'm just going to check through them, and maybe we can quickly answer some of them. So at the moment, we don't have any statistics focusing only on deaf women in Scotland. There's nothing available. That's one of the things that Stephanie said earlier. And Audrey explained as well. We know that there are figures about the general disabled population, but it's very difficult to tease out the statistics that particularly pertain to the deaf community. So hopefully we'll have more information about that in the future. We also don't have any information about people on the Scottish Islands. Stephanie, can I just check with you if there are deaf people living on the islands?
Yeah, I think. I think that was linked to the map that we had on the slide. So the dots on the map were effectively representing 13 police divisions. The divisions cover quite wide areas. So there was one dot that highlighted the Highlands and Islands division. So that would be covered by what we call N division, Highlands and Islands division. And some of the islands are also covered by our Argyll and Dunbartonshire division. So there are officers that can respond and know how to respond to domestic incidents in the islands, and they're supported by colleagues on the mainland if and when required.
Okay. Now, there is a question, I think, for Sign Health. asking about can deaf people contact you through FaceTime or WhatsApp, or are there other options, or is there an option for text? Over to you, Vicky. Can you reply to that?
So when we contact, we initially contact through text, very basic, like hello, very basic, doesn't matter on English, very basic text. And then we will bring in our IDVA to offer a video call. It could be on Zoom or Skype or WhatsApp or whichever platform. And that's how we make contact. So the IDVA is then a sign language user.
That's great, very clear. Thank you very much. Now we have one more question that has been asked over, information about what happens if you want to report something to Police Scotland, and what happens afterwards. And Sign Health talked about how they provided support, but the question is really how do we let deaf women know that contact has been made? How can they be reassured that situation is being dealt with? So hopefully this project will be developing training materials, like I mentioned before, the toolkit and so on. So there will be training in there for police services, advocacies, and for deaf women as well as interpreters. So yes, I think that's we're going to be developing that with Sign Health and Police Scotland, and that will be available for anyone in the UK, anywhere in the UK and or Europe. So watch this space, and we're hoping that these resources will become available very soon. I am sorry that we have to wrap up because we have run out of time, but hopefully we've covered the questions that we had.
There was just what about documentation? There was somebody's asked, sorry, about intermediaries, and for us to highlight the importance of intermediaries.
Yes, intermediaries, yep.
I raised that as well because it's really important. If a victim or survivor of domestic abuse, goes to court, they need an intermediary to, advise, and there's so much jargon, lots of people don't understand. They need a deaf person there to support with that communication, to make sure they're aware of their rights, especially with court, it can be so difficult. So we ask for that through the solicitor, or you can ask for information, or maybe there's somebody here that can help. Maybe if you could please put it in the chat, that would be great.
So just to add to that as well, I know Stephanie is very keen that one thing that we take away from this project is that to have somebody have an official role as an independent advocate and support here in Scotland. And I know that exists in England, and there's a qualification available in England as well, but we don't have that in Scotland yet. So we're hoping to provide the evidence to persuade the authorities to develop that for Scotland as well. Is that right, Stephanie?
Yes, that's certainly something that we would like to see. We're absolutely missing that kind of key part of the chain in terms of support for people, and it's something that's been discussed about in other forums as well. So we would be big advocates of that.
Great. And I saw somebody talking about Brexit and how that's going to impact this project. But don't worry, we've already got the funding, which means that we can carry on until the project ends. We're hoping to be able to ask for an extension because of the impact of COVID. It's meant that it's slowed down our progress a little bit. So it should finish in May 2022, but we're hoping to be able to ask for an extension for the end of May of 2022 to give us time to develop the materials. Because at first we were all a bit thrown off balance by what happened with the pandemic. So we're only now sort of being able in a position to get that information out about the project. So we'll be sending out the survey that Audrey mentioned very soon. We're waiting for final approval on that, ethics approval from Police Scotland and also from the universities involved. And when it's available, that will be disseminated. So we'll share it with you all. And you can follow the Justisigns 2 project on website or on Harriet Watt BSL. where we're going to put regular information about the project, events that we're holding, training opportunities. So we'll keep putting that information out there. And I really want to say many thanks to Stephanie and Vicky, both of you, for getting involved presenting today. It was really valuable information to have your perspectives as key organisations working with this project. And also thank you to the 3 interpreters, Lizzie, Marion and Andy. And a massive thanks to Audrey Cameron as well. And it makes me kind of sad because Audrey has got a new job, which is wonderful, wonderful news. It's a great new job. She's got a full-time academic post so that she can carry on her research. So I'm delighted for her, but at the same time, I'm quite disappointed that she won't be able to carry on with this project. But thank you so much for your amazing contributions so far. We're hoping to recruit a new project research officer. So if anybody out there is interested, please do get in touch with me. So have a lovely evening, everybody. And this recording will be on the Justisigns website later. And all of you who've attended tonight will get a link to that. It may take a little time to get it uploaded, but I hope you found the information useful. And thank you so much for coming along. Good evening, everybody. Bye for now. Bye.
Good evening. Bye-bye. Thank you.